Yeah, talk about some practical tips for working with legislative committee staff. I've spent the last few weeks talking with a number of committee staffers in both the California State Assembly and State Senate, and I've gleaned quite a few practical tips that they've shared with me for those advocates and others who work with the professional staff of the policy and fiscal committees in the California State Legislature. Now, some of these recommendations might be obvious, but at the very least, they certainly bear repeating. So, these are some of the major suggestions that have been shared with me the past few weeks. Most of them are general, and then I wanted to talk about some specific ones to the fiscal committees that we call the appropriations committees in the California Legislature, and then the two budget committees. So let's go over some of the myriad suggestions for working with the policy and committee staff. First, timing is important. I heard that repeatedly. Make sure that you talk with the consultant, obviously prior to them finishing the analysis for a bill. Now, this generally occurs at least a week prior to the bill's scheduled hearing, if not earlier. Hearing from an advocate just days before a bill's scheduled committee hearing doesn't leave much opportunity for the consultant to address any concerns that you have or proposed amendments. As Assembly and Senate committees have different deadlines and rules, be sure to check in with individual committees to know what deadlines apply for things like letters and amendments. And always submit position letters to the committee on time through the portal system. Many committees actually now list on their respective web pages the dates of their scheduled hearings, along with the corresponding deadline for submission of bill letters for those scheduled hearings. Also, make sure that the author gets a copy of your submitted letter, including a staff member handling the particular bill. Also, state clearly your position on that bill letter. Definitely in the subject line, it should have the bill number, the author. Some people include the subject matter. That may not be necessary, but then definitely your position. And if you know it, the scheduled committee hearing. There are basically four common positions, although I've seen others, including note concerns, work with author, but those that are reflected in the portal system that the legislature uses, and again, the most common ones are support, oppose, support if amended, or oppose unless amended. You should always ask directly for any suggested amendments and, of course, explain clearly why those amendments are actually necessary. You should also, at the hearing, coordinate your testimony with any colleagues as much as you can. Sometimes you can't. If you're calling into a committee hearing with a Me Too position, please pay close attention to what the chair and the moderator's instructions are. Generally, all they're looking for is your name, organization that you represent in the position on your bill. Always keep the committee consultants in the loop, particularly on amendment discussions and other actions or information related to or that may affect the bill as well as the committee hearing. Don't go to the chair of the committee first on a bill, whether you're in support or opposition. Go first to the author's office, then the committee staff, and then to the members. Try not to bring problems without proposed solutions if you can. Kindness goes a long way with your dealings with committee staff. And by the way, that means both the consultant and the committee secretary, as they're called in the Assembly, or the committee assistant, as they're called in the Senate. Also, I've heard this is a problem. Return the phone calls or emails from committee staff promptly. Apparently, there are some lobbyists who have a bad habit of either not responding or responding after it's too late to be helpful. When committee staff reach out to you on a bill, they're doing so for a reason, and they're usually operating under time constraints. It's also suggested to provide materials in an easy-to-use format, such as a Word document, so that the committee staff can cut and paste arguments, for example, that you set forth in your bill letter, excuse me. Also, talk to the committee staff about the problem that you're trying to solve for your client. Sometimes legislation, frankly, is not always the best approach. Maybe they can help with the governor's office or the executive branch, maybe an administrative agency or department. It can also be helpful to let committee staff know the bills that you're shopping and your potential authors. Staff can occasionally help with finding the appropriate author. And I've been admonished many times when I've talked to folks this past month, don't wait until the gut and amend deadline to surface your priority proposals. It won't be well received by committee staff. Also, avoid jamming the committee staff with late author amendments. Just because the deadline for amendments is 2 weeks before the hearing, the sooner you get it to committee staff, those amendments is always better for you and your author in the bill. Try to communicate your issues on bills that your client does not like as soon as possible, even if you don't have a formal position on the bill yet. If you gut and amend a bill in the second house, be sure to involve, or at the very least notify, the other house's committee, the house of origin, of your amendments and any negotiations on the bill. By the way, it was also shared with me that it might be helpful to meet with committee staff at the beginning of the year to discuss the upcoming session, your client policy interest, and whether or not they have any particular priorities, that is your clients. By the way, I always say this, but don't forget to share your advocacy letters and support materials and any proposed amendments to the appropriate Assembly Republican Caucus consultant and the Senate Republican Caucus consultant. Also, always try and identify the client that you're engaging on behalf of with the committee staff. And as I've said before, I think be clear what you're asking for. Don't forget to put that letter in the portal. Committee staff do review them. And after they're in the portal, then you really don't need further communications in the portal unless there are updates because the bill language has changed or your client's position has changed on the bill. As a general rule, always start the meeting off with what your ask is so that the staff don't have to try and figure it out while you're talking. Have an honest discussion with them. If you have amendments that'll make your position change to neutral or even remove your opposition entirely, then be very specific and clear about what those amendments are. If you're a bill sponsor and the committee's suggesting amendments to the bill, realize that they're generally trying to help you keep your bill moving through the process. And by the way, I've been told several times, if the governor's office suggests amendments, they may not be suggestions. Pay attention to bill referrals, because sometimes bills are double referred. Some are keyed fiscal or non-fiscal. Even those that are keyed non-fiscal sometimes get pulled into the Appropriations Committee. If you get a sense that committee staff is good with a bill that you're in support of, or you're sponsoring, then try to keep any meetings small and short unless they need some sort of follow-up. And I mentioned this earlier, but as a reminder, don't try to go around committee staff by talking to the chair staff. A good office won't do that anyway, and the consultant is not going to trust you going forward. Now, there's a difference between talking to the chair's staff and trying to undermine the committee staff, and recognize that. Be straightforward about your bill's strengths and weaknesses. No bill is really perfect. And consultants often understand and appreciate that a bill comes with trade-offs. So try to stay away from puffery or excessive doom and gloom statements. And don't ever hide the backstory on your bill. Disclose those facts because they eventually come out. And if they don't come from you, you'll probably lose credibility with committee staff. Also, it's been shared with me multiple times the past few weeks to not call or email the committee staff to ask questions that can be answered by a quick glance at either the daily file or the committee's webpage. And be judicious with your meeting requests, especially during the busiest part of the year. Understand too that consultants often compare notes with each other, and the committee consultants also share notes and information with the chair's personal staff. So it's better that you provide the same information to everyone up front. You don't want to get into a contentious situation or cause confusion or worse, agitation. And, if you have a staffer's phone number, don't abuse that privilege. I always try to say be respectful. Also treat everyone in the legislative process with respect. Above all else, be honest. And from me, I always say respect the institution and respect the process. Now, I wanted to share a couple of things as it relates to the budget committee and the fiscal committees. For the budget committee, try and read the governor proposed budget change proposals, as well as the Jan 10 budget and the May revise, obviously in the issue areas that you care about, and then contact the relevant budget committee staff, including the Republican caucus staff, in order to weigh in on BCPs early, as well as other parts of the budget, whether it's Jan 10 or May revise. The other thing is, don't make staff guess your group's thoughts on a budget proposal. Submit your position or thoughts prior to their meetings with administration staff so that they can raise the issue. This typically occurs about 2 weeks before a scheduled budget subcommittee hearing. Also, read the draft trailer bill language when it gets posted on the Department of Finance website and submit any comments or concerns as soon as possible. Also, be prepared for when the various pieces of trailer bill language get added to a budget spot or intent measure in order for your organization support or oppose letters to be added to the bill record. Don't forget there's just that brief 72 hours sometimes due to the Prop 54 72-hour in print rule. If your client's position is important enough, you should be available to testify at the relevant budget hearing. And finally, you should, if you have a sponsored budget request, it's recommended to secure a sponsor, an author, a legislator, to sort of be your sponsor, that they'll work that proposal on the inside, just like a bill. Lastly, when it comes to the fiscal committees, that of course we call the appropriations committees in our two houses, try to keep any letters to the committee staff as well as the Republican caucus staff to the state government fiscal impact of the bill. That's really what the appropriations consultant writes about in his or her analysis and cares most about. And try to get those letters to the committee prior to the week when the bill is being analyzed. So this deadline's a week before the bill is heard in the Approps Committee. And this applies to a bill that has a due pass recommendation or it's slated for suspense. And then lastly, when a bill is on suspense, suggest any possible amendments to the Appropriations Committee staff, perhaps to deal with the cost pressures or to improve the administrative implementation of the bill, for example. All right, so hopefully those suggestions are helpful, practical tips for working with committee staff in the California State Legislature.